The continuance was not supposed to be here. That was the first thing KL-7 kept telling himself as he stood at the main console watching the drive core temperature climb past every red line on the display. The ship groaned, not in the way old ships groan when they are tired. It groaned in the way a machine groans when something very important is about to become very broken. KL-7 was a senior engineer of the Voron Collective. He had served on the continuance for 63 standard years. He had repaired ion drives in the cold dark. Between stars, he had replaced hull plating during meteor showers. He had once fixed a navigation array with nothing but a calibration rod and a firm understanding of mathematics. He was not the kind of person who panicked. But the drive core was failing, and the nearest Voron repair station was 11 days away, and the continuance was already dropping out of faster than light travel, whether he wanted it to or not. The ship's navigation system began scanning for the nearest stable land mass. Automatically, it found one in less than 3 seconds, a blue and green planet, third from its star, sitting quietly, a system the old charts labeled as SAW. There was a small note beside the entry, added centuries ago by some Voron surveyor who had passed through without stopping. SAW 3, inhabited pre-FTL civilization. Disregarded. KL-7 stared at that word, disregarded. It meant the planet had been looked at, noted, and passed over because the species living there was not yet advanced enough to be useful or dangerous. It was the kind of planet the Voron flew past without slowing down. It was not the kind of planet you made an emergency landing on. He had no choice. "Prepare for atmospheric entry," he said to his crew of 12. "We are setting down." On SAW 3, there was a long silence on the bridge. "The pre-FTL world?" asked his second engineer, Ren 4. "Yes." Another silence. "Is that allowed?" KL-7 looked at the drive core temperature, which had now gone past the highest red line and into a range that had no color because no one had ever expected a reading that high. "It is allowed," he said, "when the alternative is drifting dead in space." The continuance entered the atmosphere of SAW 3 at a steep angle, trailing a long ribbon of heat behind it. From the ground, it would have looked like a very large, very fast meteor. It was not a graceful entry. It was the kind of entry where everyone on the bridge held onto something and nobody spoke. They landed in a flat area of the planet's largest landmass. The ground shook when they touched down. Several trees at the edge of the landing zone fell over. KL-7 checked the sensors, confirmed. The atmosphere was breathable, confirmed. There were no immediate threats, and then took a moment to sit very still and feel grateful to be alive. Then he looked at the drive core readings. It was worse than he had thought. The primary containment ring had cracked. The power relay connecting the core to the ship's main systems had fused. 3 of the 5 cooling channels were completely blocked. This was not a simple repair. This was the kind of repair that took a full Voron maintenance team, proper equipment, and a minimum of 2 weeks. He did not have a full maintenance team. He had 12 crew members, basic tools, and a world full of pre-FTL beings outside his door. KL-7 stood up, rolled his shoulders, and began making a list. He was still making the list when Ren 4 came to him with a strange look on his face. Engineer KL7, Ren 4 said carefully. There are locals outside. Kale looked up. How many? 3, and they knocked on the hull. KL7 set down his list. They knocked. Yes, like a door. He walked to the exterior monitor and looked at the feed from the outside. Cameras. 3 humans stood near the base of the ship. They were small, soft-looking creatures standing on 2 legs, dressed in simple clothing. One of them, an older male with white hair and a worn jacket, was standing closest to the hull. He had knocked with his knuckles. He was now looking up at the ship with the calm, curious expression of someone who had just found an interesting car in a parking lot. The other 2 were younger. One was holding a small glowing rectangle up toward the ship, some kind of recording device, KL7 guessed. The third was eating something. None of them appeared frightened. This was strange. Every species the Vorin had ever made first contact with had shown some level of fear response when confronted with a vessel the size of a city block landing in their territory. Fear was logical. Fear made sense. A large unknown object falling from the sky was a reasonable thing to be afraid of. These 3 were not afraid. They were curious. Kale made a decision that he would later describe in his official report as professionally necessary, and that Ren 4 would later describe as the strangest thing I ever saw a senior engineer do. He activated the exterior speakers, ran the translation matrix, which had a basic library of SOL 3 languages from old survey data, and spoke. This vessel has experienced a mechanical failure. We do not require assistance. Please maintain your distance. There was a short pause outside. Then the old human with white hair cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted back, "You sure about that?" Sounded pretty rough coming down. KL7 stared at the monitor. The human was talking to him, not screaming, not running, not falling to his knees, just talking. The way one person talks to another person when they are standing in a driveway and one of them has a car with smoke coming out of the engine. "We are certain," KL7 said. "Please step back from the vessel." "I'm not in the way," the human said reasonably. "What kind of drive system is that? I can see heat damage on the lower port side. That's a bad cooling failure, isn't it?" KL7 looked at Ren 4. Ren 4 looked at KL7. "How does it know about cooling failures?" Ren 4 asked quietly. "It is a primitive species," KL7 said. "It does not know. It is guessing." But the human was not guessing, or if it was guessing, it was guessing correctly. And that was almost worse. KL7 opened the exterior speakers. "Again, you are correct that we have experienced a cooling failure. However, the technology involved is beyond your ability to assist with. Please step back." The human was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mind if I take a look?" "Yes," KL7 said, "I mind." "Fair enough," the human said and sat down on a rock nearby, apparently content to wait. It took KL7 several minutes to understand what was happening. The human was not leaving. It was not attacking. It was not running to alert others. It was simply sitting, watching the ship with patient, interested eyes, as if waiting to see what happened next, as if a massive alien vessel landing in its region was something that could be waited out like rain. More humans arrived over the next hour. Not soldiers, not officials, just people. They came on foot and in small wheeled vehicles. They stood at what They apparently considered a respectful distance and looked at the ship. Some of them had food, some of them had the small glowing rectangles. One of them had a folding chair. KL7 watched them on the monitors, while his crew began the slow process of laying out the damage. The mood among his crew was tense. The Vorin were not a species that dealt well with the unknown. They liked order, they liked procedure, they liked knowing what a thing was going to do before it did it. These humans were not following any behavioral pattern in their contact database. Then the old human knocked on the hull. Again. KL7 answered the speakers. "What is it?" "I brought you something," the human said. He was holding a small container in his hand, letting steam rise from it. "Don't know if you drink it, but where I come from, when someone's having a rough day, you bring them coffee." KL7 did not know what coffee was. He ran it through the translation matrix. The matrix returned a hot beverage, brewed from roasted seeds, consumed widely by the dominant species of Sol-3, often during periods of stress or social interaction. "We do not consume your biological products," KL7 said. "That's fine," the human said and set the container on the ground near the hull. "Anyway, my name's Dale, by the way, Dale Hutchins. I'm a retired mechanic, spent 40 years fixing engines. Big ones, small ones nobody thought could be fixed." He paused. "I'd really like to take a look at yours." KL7 sat back in his seat and looked at the drive core readings. Then he looked at his list. Then he thought very carefully about the fact that he had no proper repair team, no replacement parts, and at least 3 weeks of work ahead of him. He thought about the word disregarded in the old survey notes. Then he opened the side access hatch. Dale Hutchins walked in carrying his coffee, looked up at the cracked containment ring, the fused relay, the blocked cooling channels, and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then he let out a slow breath and said, "Okay, I see your problem." He was right. He was completely, precisely, exactly right. And that was the moment KL7 began to understand that perhaps the survey notes had been wrong. Perhaps Sol-3 was not disregarded because it was unimportant. Perhaps it had simply not been looked at carefully enough. By the second morning, there were tents. KL7 stood at the open side hatch of the continuance and looked out at the field that had overnight become something between a campsite and a construction yard. Humans had set up shelters, they had brought lights, portable generators, long tables covered in tools and papers, and the glowing rectangles they seemed to carry. Everywhere, someone had strung colored lights between 2 of the tents. There was a smell in the air that the translation matrix identified as grilled meat, which KL7 noted and did not investigate further. There were now at least 40 humans on site. He had not invited 40 humans. He had opened the hatch for one human named Dale Hutchins, but Dale had apparently told other people, and those people had told other people, and this was apparently how the dominant species of Sol-3 responded to interesting problems. They gathered, they showed up with their tools and their food and their folding chairs, and they made themselves useful, whether they had been asked to or not. KL7 had filed a preliminary damage report the previous night, listing the 3 main problems with the drive core: the cracked containment ring, the fused power relay, and the blocked cooling channels. He had also listed the estimated repair time, 16 days minimum, and the parts he would need, none of which existed on this planet. Dale had read the report over KL7's shoulder because apparently the translation matrix worked both ways, and Dale had figured that out within the first hour. He had read the list of needed parts, made a quiet sound in his throat, and said, "We don't have these, but I think we can make something that works the same way." KL7 had said politely that this was unlikely. Dale had shrugged and gone to sleep on a cot he had brought from his home. He was snoring within 4 minutes. Now in the morning light, KL7 walked down the ramp and over to where Dale stood at one of the long tables, surrounded by 6 other humans. 2 of them were young women who, KL7 learned, worked for something called an aerospace company. One was a man who built industrial furnaces. One was a professor of material science from a nearby university who had driven through the night and arrived with 3 large bags of equipment and the expression of someone who had just won a lottery. The remaining 2 were Dale's neighbors, who were not engineers but were, by all appearances, very good at doing whatever Dale told them to do without asking too many questions. On the table was a hand-drawn diagram. KL7 looked at it, then he looked at Dale. "This is the containment ring," KL7 said slowly. "Near enough," Dale said. "Different material, same principle. You need something that holds a magnetic field. Steady under high heat, right? We can't make your material, but we've got titanium ceramic composites that can handle the temperature. Won't last as long as yours, but it'll get you home." KL7 studied the diagram more carefully. It was not precise. The proportions were drawn by hand. There were question marks in the margins where Dale had not been sure about something. But the logic behind it was sound. In fact, it was more than sound. It addressed the containment problem in a way that was structurally different from standard Voron design, and yet looking at it, KL7 could not immediately say it was wrong. "Where would you get titanium ceramic composite?" he asked. Dale pointed at the man who built industrial furnaces. "Frank knows a guy." Frank nodded. "I know a guy." This was, KL7 would later note in his official report, a phrase that meant nothing and accomplished everything on this planet. Within 6 hours, a large vehicle arrived carrying sheets of raw material. Within 8 hours, 3 humans were in the ship's engine bay taking careful measurements of the cracked containment ring. Within 10 hours, they had set up a portable fabrication unit outside, a machine that cut and shaped metal with focused heat, and were manufacturing a replacement component from scratch. They sang while they worked. KL7 was not sure what to do with this information. The fused power relay was a more difficult problem. The component that had burned out was not mechanical. It was a crystalline conductor grown in a Voron laboratory over a period of months, designed to channel specific energy frequencies without resistance. There was no equivalent on Earth. At least there was not supposed to be. The materials professor, whose name was Dr. Yora Asai, had been studying a fragment of the broken relay under a portable microscope for 2 hours when she stood up very straight and said, "I know what this is doing. The geometry of the crystal structure is directing the current. It's like a physical algorithm." "Yes," said KL7, "that is exactly what it is. We can't grow a crystal like this, Doctor." Ase said, "Not in time, but I wonder." She stopped, she picked up her tablet, and started writing very quickly. She wrote for 11 minutes without stopping. Then she turned the tablet toward Kale. 7. What if we didn't use a crystal at all, she said. What if we printed a lattice structure that replicates the geometry in a conductive polymer? It wouldn't be as efficient, but it should work. Kale 7 looked at the schematic. His first instinct was to say it was impossible that a printed polymer could not replicate the precise function of a grown crystal, but he made himself look at the mathematics instead of the assumption. He checked it twice, then a third time. The efficiency loss would be approximately 9%, he said. Yeah, Dr. Ase said, that's okay. That is acceptable. She was already talking to someone on her communication device, ordering materials. The cooling channels were the last major problem. They had been blocked by buildup of degraded coolant that had hardened into a semi-solid mass when the temperature spiked. The channels themselves were intact, they just needed to be cleared. This should have been the simplest problem. It was, in fact, solved in the least dignified way. Dale looked at the blocked channels, looked at the composition of the blockage which Kale 7 provided from the ship's chemical analysis system, and said, that's basically mineral scale. Heavy duty, but still scale. Then he went to one of the tables, picked up a large container of a liquid that was extremely acidic, and said, I use this to clean old engine blocks. Kale 7 stared at him. You want to put that in my cooling system? I want to put that in your cooling system. That seems it'll work, Dale said. Trust me, I've done dumber things that worked. This was not, Kale 7 felt, the most reassuring statement he had ever heard. But Dale walked him through the chemical reaction in patient detail, explaining what the acid would do to the blockage and why it would not damage the channel walls, and the mathematics checked out. Again, the logic was simple. The approach was rough, but it was correct. They flushed the channels, the blockage is cleared. The whole repair, which Kale 7 had estimated at 16 days, was completed in 72 hours. And then something happened that Kale 7 had not planned for. On the final day, while running diagnostics on the repaired drive core, the system returned an output reading that was wrong, not wrong as in broken, wrong as in too high. The power output reading was 34% above the drive core's rated capacity. Kale 7 ran the diagnostic 3 more times. The number did not change. He called Dale over. Dale looked at the reading, looked at the repaired components, and scratched the back of his neck. The polymer lattice, Dr. Ase said. From behind them, she had been watching. I think the geometry I used is slightly more efficient than the original at this temperature range. I didn't expect that. That's interesting. Interesting, Kale 7 repeated. Yeah, you should probably recalibrate your output limiters before you leave, or you'll burn the new ring. Kale 7 looked at the reading for a long time. He looked at the repaired containment ring made from a titanium ceramic composite that did not exist in any foreign parts catalog. He looked at the polymer lattice relay, designed in 11 minutes on a tablet. He looked at the cooling channels, cleared with industrial cleaning fluid. A group of humans had fixed his ship in 3 days. They had fixed it with materials they made up on the spot, and snorts Somehow accidentally, they had made it better. He filed a new report that night. He titled it Anomalous Repair Event. Classification, deeply concerning. Then he sat for a while outside the ship under the stars with a cup of something Dale had given him that turned out to be hot tea, which the Matrix identified as another beverage humans produced during moments of stress or social closeness. He did not like the taste. He drank the whole cup anyway. Around him, the humans were packing up their tents and their tables and their tools, laughing among themselves, saying goodbye to each other in the easy way of people who had worked together and done something good. Dale sat nearby on his rock, looking up at the sky the same way KL7 was. "You do this kind of thing often?" KL7 asked. Dale looked at him. "Fix things. Improvise. Make solutions from materials. That should not work." Dale thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I guess we do. Never really thought about it. Some things broken, you fix it with what you've got." He paused. "Is that unusual?" KL7 thought about the Vorin, about their factories, their parts catalogs, their carefully documented procedures, about how a failed drive core in Vorin space would have meant waiting for the right team with the right tools and the right parts, all of which existed in specific places and took specific amounts of time to arrive. "Yes," he said, "it is very unusual." Dale nodded slowly, as if he was filing that away somewhere. They sat in silence for a while longer. Above them, the stars were very bright. Somewhere up there, 11 days away, was the nearest Vorin station, full of proper engineers with proper equipment, who would have done this job properly, and much more slowly. KL7 looked up at the sky. He was not sure anymore what properly meant. The Grand Continuance Council met in a chamber made of pale stone, an older tradition. It was a wide, circular room near the center of the Vorin homeworld, with tall windows that let in cold gray light and long curved tables that seated 48 members. The members wore formal gray robes. The room smelled of polished stone and something faintly metallic, the way old important buildings always smell. There were no decorations on the walls. The Vorin did not decorate council chambers. Council chambers were for thinking, not for looking at things. KL7 stood in the center of the room and gave his report. He had been giving reports to councils for 63 years. He knew how to stand straight and speak clearly and present data in the correct order. He did all of that. He described the drive failure, the emergency landing on Sol 3, the condition of the ship, the nature of the damage. He described the humans who had arrived without being called. He described the repairs. He described the 34% output increase. When he said that number, the chamber became very quiet. Counselor Devon 1, who sat at the head of the long curved table and had sat there for longer than most ships had been flying, leaned forward slightly. She had a long face and careful eyes, and the manner of someone who had heard many reports and found most of them unsurprising. She looked surprised now. 34%, she said. It was not quite a question. 34.2, KL7 said. I ran the diagnostic 11 times. And the material used for the containment ring, a titanium ceramic composite of local manufacture. I have attached the full material specifications to the report. The Vorin Engineering Division may find them interesting. There was quiet murmuring around the table. Counselors were looking at their tablets, pulling up the attached files, reading the specifications. Some of them read slowly, some of them read fast and then read again. Counselor Devon 1 was quiet for a long moment, then she said, "The improvised relay was designed in 11 minutes. Yes. By one person. Yes, a materials researcher." She did not seem to think it was a notable achievement. Another long quiet. "Your assessment of the species," Devon 1 said in summary. Kale 7 had thought carefully about how to answer this. He had thought about it for most of the 11-day journey home. He had composed several drafts and deleted all of them, and in the end, decided to simply say what he had seen. "They are pre-FTL," he said. "Their fastest ships do not leave their own solar system. Their weapons are small and chemical by any standard measurement. They are a young species in early development, but the measurement is wrong." He paused. "The measurement assumes that technological progress moves in a straight line, that a species at point A cannot do what a species at point B can do because they have not yet traveled the distance between them. The humans do not travel in a straight line. They jump, they look at a problem, find a direction they have not tried, and go there immediately without asking if it has been done before. They do not check if the solution exists. They make it exist." The chamber was quiet again. Outside the tall windows, the gray sky was getting grayer. It was going to rain. "And your recommendation?" Devon 1 asked. "I recommend that Sol 3 be reclassified. Not as a protected system, not as a disregarded system, as a monitored system of significant interest." Devon 1 nodded slowly. She made a note. Around the table, other counselors made notes. The report was added to the official record. There was some procedural discussion about the classification process and which department would handle the monitoring, and what the exact wording of the new entry should be. Kale 7 stood in the center of the room and listened to the procedural discussion and thought about Dale Hutchins sitting on a rock looking up at the same stars. The meeting ended. The counselors filed out. Kale 7 was preparing to leave when Devon 1 stopped him with a word. "Kale 7. He turned. She was standing by the window now, looking out at the gray sky. "You left something out of your report," she said. "I do not believe so. You described the repairs. You described the output improvement. You described your assessment of the species." She turned to look at him. "You did not describe how you felt about it." Kale 7 considered this. "A technical report does not include." "I am not asking about the report," she said. "I am asking you." He was quiet for a moment. "I felt that we had made a mistake," he said at last. "Not by landing there, by not looking at that planet carefully for the last several centuries. We flew past it and marked it as unimportant. We were wrong." Devon 1 looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and turned back to the window. He left the chamber and walked out into the cold gray city, and he did not know yet that everything he had just said in that room was going to matter very soon, and very badly. He found out 41 days later, in the middle of the night. The message came through a restricted channel flagged at the highest level of priority. It was from the Voran Intelligence Division, which was not a group that normally communicated with senior Engineers in the middle of the night. KL7 read the message sitting on the edge of his sleep platform in the dark, with the quiet hum of the station around him. The message was short. It contained two things. The first was a piece of intelligence gathered 6 months ago from a deep cover monitoring post near Draft Dominion space. The Draft Dominion was the largest military empire in the known galaxy. They had existed for 800 years. In that time, they had consumed 43 other civilizations, not conquered, consumed. They did not take territory and leave populations behind. They identified emerging species that showed what their internal documents called irregular potential. Species that developed technology or tactics in unexpected ways, and they eliminated them before they could become problems. The intelligence report described a draft fleet movement, 30 warships classified as a suppression package, destination Sol system. The second thing in the message was the draft's own assessment of humanity, intercepted from their communications. It was detailed and precise. The draft had been watching Earth for decades. They had recorded human technological development, human behavioral patterns, human military capability. They had run it through their assessment model and arrived at a classification. Irregular potential, recommend. Elimination. KL7 sat in the dark and read the message 3 more there. Space 8 days ago. Sol 3 was approximately 19 days away at standard travel speed, which meant humanity had 11 days before 30 draft warships arrived in their solar system. 30 warships that had destroyed civilizations far older and stronger than Earth. 30 warships crewed by soldiers who had been doing this for 800 years and had not cleared his throat yet failed. Humanity had no FTL travel. They could not run. They snorts had no weapons that could reach a ship in orbit. They could not fight. They did not even know the Drawfer existed. KL7 set down the message and sat very still. The Grand Continuance Council would meet tomorrow morning. They would review the intelligence. They would discuss the situation in measured, careful terms. They would debate their obligations, their treaties, their political relationships with the Drawfer Dominion. They would weigh the cost of intervention. They would note carefully that the Vorin had a long-standing policy of non-interference in conflicts involving pre-FTL species. They would note that humanity was only recently classified as a system of significant interest, and that significant interest was not the same as an alliance. They would take 4 days to reach a conclusion, and then whatever they decided, it would be too late. KL7 stood up. He did not go back to sleep. He went to the docking bay where the Continuance was still sitting in maintenance review. After its return from Sol 3, it had been fully repaired by Vorin engineers since then, properly this time with proper parts and proper tools. The polymer relay had been replaced with a grown crystal. The titanium ceramic ring had been replaced with regulation material. The output rating had gone back down to standard. KL7 looked at the ship for a long time. Then he walked to the small courier vessel docked in the bay beside it. Courier vessel was faster than the Continuance. It was lighter. It could make the trip to Sol 3 in 9 days if pushed hard. 9 days. That left 2 days before the Drawfer arrived. He stood at the courier's entry hatch. For a while, he thought about his 63 years of service. He thought about regulations and procedures and proper channels. He thought about the council meeting tomorrow morning and the 4 days of debate and the conclusion that would come too late. He thought about a human sitting on a rock looking up at the stars asking if it was unusual to fix things with what you had. He opened the hatch. He sent one message before he left, not to the council, not to Davin 1, to Ren 4, his second engineer who had been there on Sol 3 and who Kale 7 trusted to understand. The message said, I am going back. If the council asks, tell them I acted without authorization. That will be true. He launched the courier into the dark and pointed it toward the sun called Sol. Behind him, the Voran homeworld grew small in the rear display. And ahead of him, somewhere in the black 30 Drapha, warships were moving toward a planet full of people who fixed broken things with whatever they had and did not yet know that the most broken thing in their sky was coming for them. He pushed the drive harder. 8 days if he was lucky. Kale 7 pushed the courier ship for 8 and 2 days without sleeping more than 3 hours at a stretch. He ate from the emergency ration pack stored under the pilot's seat. He drank something the ship's dispenser made that it called coffee, which was not coffee. He knew that now because he had tasted the real thing, but it was hot and it kept him awake, so he drank it anyway. He spent most of the journey sitting in the pilot's seat, watching the star pattern shift as he flew, running calculations he already knew the answer to and running them again just to have something to do. The courier dropped out of FTL in the Sol system with 2 days to spare. Kale 7 immediately activated the ship's broadcast system and began transmitting on every frequency the continuance had logged during the repair visit. Frequencies used by human radio, television, military communication, civilian bands. He transmitted the translation matrix signal first, which the humans would not understand but which would help any translation systems they had. Then he transmitted a simple message in every human language in the survey database on loop. This is Kale 7 of the Voron Collective. I am the engineer you helped on the field in New Jersey. I am coming to your planet. This is urgent. Please respond. He was still transmitting when the responses started coming back. There were a lot of them. Most of them were from civilian radio operators, news stations, curious private individuals. Those Kale 7 ignored. He was looking for official contact, the kind that meant someone in authority was on the line. It took 20 minutes, then a clear signal came through on a frequency the database tagged as belonging to something called the United Earth Defense Coalition. He had not heard of the United Earth Defense Coalition. And GT snorts. And GT, it had not existed in the survey data. From his last visit, he noted this and kept going. Voron vessel, a voice said in calm, careful English, this is UEDC Central Command. We have been tracking your approach for the last several hours. Please confirm your identity and your intention. I am Kale 7, he said. My intention is to warn you, a Draph Dominion suppression fleet is inbound to your system. 30 warships, estimated arrival in approximately 2 days from now. They intend to destroy your civilization. A pause on the other end. Understood, the voice said. Please. Proceed to these coordinates. A set of numbers followed. Someone will meet you. On the ground. KL7 had expected many things from this conversation. He had expected disbelief. He had expected fear, or at least alarm. He had expected questions about what the draft were, what they wanted, how he knew what could be done. He had not expected understood and a set of landing coordinates delivered in the calm tone of someone receiving a scheduled delivery. He landed on a flat reinforced surface. Inside a large fenced area, it looked like a military installation, but a strange one-half military base, half construction yard. There were buildings that looked official and organized, and then right next to them, large open structures full of equipment and half-built things and people moving around them at speed. He came down the ramp and found 3 people waiting for him. The first 2 were uniformed officials. A tall woman with silver rank insignia, who introduced herself as General Sira Malik of the UEDC, and a younger man beside her who said nothing but was writing everything down. The third person standing slightly to the side in a worn jacket holding a thermos was Dale Hutchins. KL7 stopped walking. Dale looked at him with the same calm, interested expression he had worn on the day he knocked on the hull. He was older, his white hair was the same, his eyes were the same. Figured you'd come back, Dale said. How did you know? KL7 asked. Didn't, Dale said, but something was going to. We started getting ready. He held out the thermos. Coffee real this time. KL7 took it without thinking. He looked at General Malik. I need to brief you on the threat, the draft fleet. We've had basic intelligence on the draft for about a year, Malik said. She said it the way someone says a thing they have been sitting with for a long time, not detailed, some intercepted signals, some data we picked up when we started running our own deep space arrays. We didn't know they were coming here specifically until about 6 days ago. KL7 stared at her. You have deep space arrays? We have several things, Malik said, without particular pride, as if this was simply a list of facts. Why don't you come inside? He went inside. The room they brought him to was large, well lit and covered in screens. Screens on the wall, screens on tables, screens people were carrying around and pointing at each other. Maps, diagrams, trajectories, and on the main wall, a large display showing a region of space that KL7 recognized as the outer edge of the Sol system, with 30 small moving indicators on it. The draft fleet already plotted, already tracked. You know where they are, KL7 said. We've had eyes on them for 4 days, said a young man at a nearby console. Without looking up, you have sensors that reach that far. We do now. KL7 looked at General Malik. Your survey classification said pre-FTL civilization. We are, she said, technically our FTL drive is still in testing. It works, but we haven't certified it for long-range use yet. She paused. We've been working fast. How fast? Come on, said Dale from behind him. Let me show you. They took him outside through different door, and through that door was a view that KL7 was not prepared for. The construction yard was larger than it had looked from the air, much larger. It stretched across the entire back portion of the installation and beyond it. into a secondary covered structure the size of a small city block, and in that yard and in that structure there were ships. Not finished ships, all of them. Some were complete, sitting on landing pads under floodlights. Some were half-built, skeletons of metal frame and exposed system housings. Some were in earlier stages, just the central structures laid out on the ground with teams of people working around them. But they were warships, clearly. Warships. Heavy armor plating, weapon emplacements, drive housings that KL7 recognized as derivative of the schematics his drive core had briefly displayed during the repair visit. The humans had looked at those schematics for 3 days and then built warships around the principles they had observed. How many? KL7 asked. 47 completed or near complete, Dale said. Another 12 in earlier stages. Those won't be ready in time, he sipped from his thermos. The 47 will be. KL7 turned and looked at him. When did you start this? About 4 months after you left, Dale said. We'd seen enough of your drive, designed to understand the basic energy principles. Took us a while to work out the weapons, but we had the underlying physics by then. He shrugged. We had a lot of spare time. You built 47 warships, KL7 said slowly. Because you were bored? No, Dale said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the ships, at the lights moving over them in the early evening. We built them because we looked at those schematics and we could not, you know how it is. You see a problem you could solve, you solve it. He paused, and maybe some of us had a feeling that whoever flew through here in a broken ship wasn't the most dangerous thing in that sky. KL7 was silent. Dale looked at him sideways. What are we dealing with, really? KL7 told him all of it. The Droth Dominion, 800 years old, 43 civilizations destroyed. The doctrine of elimination for species with irregular potential. He told him about the Vorin Council and the 4-day debate and the political relationship with the Droth that made intervention complicated. He told him that he had come without authorization and that no official Vorin support was coming. When he finished, Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, so it's just us and my courier ship, KL7 said, which is fast but lightly armed. Right, Dale nodded. Come talk to our engineers. They've been wanting to ask someone with actual FTL experience about a few things. They went to the engineers. There were a lot of them. They had been waiting, apparently, with significant patience and a very long list of questions. They spread the questions across 3 large tables and they asked them quickly, the way people ask questions. They had been saving up. KL7 answered all of them. He answered the ones about FTL mechanics and the ones about weapons calibration and the ones about draft ship armor specifications, which he had pulled from the intelligence file before leaving. The engineers listened to every answer and then went back to their ships with the new information. Over the next 30 hours, things changed. Not large things, not rebuilding from scratch changes, but the kind of small, precise changes that come from knowing exactly what you are facing. Weapon emplacements were adjusted, shield configurations were modified. One team tore apart a completed ship's targeting system and rebuilt it from the inside in 18 hours. They put it back together correctly. KL7 watched them do it, and did not say a word because there was nothing to say. On the last night before the fleet arrived, KL-7 stood outside with Dale. Again, it had become, he realized, a habit. They stood and looked at the sky. "Are you afraid?" KL-7 asked. Dale thought about it a little. He said probably should be more. He drank his coffee. "You?" "Yes," KL-7 said, "a great deal." "That's honest." "I try to be." Dale looked up at the sky. The stars were very clear. Somewhere up there, 30 draft warships were closing in, and 47 human ships were being prepared. And the whole situation was something that had no precedent in any history book KL-7 had ever read. "We're not going to lose," Dale said. It was not a boast. It was not even confidence exactly. It was the matter-of-fact tone of a man who had looked at a broken engine many times and knew that broken things could be fixed. "You cannot know that," KL-7 said. "No," Dale agreed, "but I know us." He looked over at the ships. "We're going to surprise them." KL-7 looked at the ships too. He thought about 34% output above rated capacity. He thought about 11 minutes and a polymer lattice. He thought about industrial cleaning fluid in a cooling system and the words, "Trust me, I've done dumber things that worked." He took a sip of the coffee. It was, he had decided, a very good drink. "Yes," he said quietly, "I believe you." "Will." The draft fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system at 3:40 hours station time. KL-7 was on the bridge of one of the human warships, not because anyone had asked him to be there. He had offered his tactical knowledge of draft combat patterns, and General Malik had said yes without hesitation. The way she said most things, the bridge was small compared to Voran vessels built close and efficient with screens on every surface and crew stations that were almost too close together. The humans seemed to prefer it that way. There was no wasted space. Everything had a purpose. KL-7 sat in an observer chair that someone had bolted to the wall near the main tactical display, which was a reasonable way to describe what he was doing. He was observing. The humans were working. The draft fleet appeared on the display as 30 red markers moving in the precise V formation the Dominion had used for 600 years. It was called the Iron Wing. It was designed to compress the target into a killing zone where the concentrated fire of the forward ships destroyed whatever was in the center, while the flanking ships prevented escape. The Iron Wing had never failed against a pre-FTL civilization. It had never needed to adapt. General Malik stood at the center of the bridge looking at the display. She had slept 4 hours in the last 2 days. She did not look like someone who had slept 4 hours. She looked like someone who had a very clear idea of what she was doing. "All ships confirm ready," she said into her headset. 47 voices came back through the channel. "Ready, ready, ready." On the display, the draft formation moved closer. KL-7 watched the Iron Wing tighten as they entered the inner system, the forward ships accelerating slightly, the flanking ships pulling into their classic positions. It was precise. It was practiced. It was the movement of a force that had done this exact thing 43 times and saw no reason this time would be different. Then Malik spoke one more time. "Play it," she said. From the communication array of every human warship across every broadcast, Frequency in the system, there came a sound. KL7 had never heard it before. It was music, human music, loud and driving, with a rhythm like something being built. The translation matrix could not find a meaning for it. It was simply sound, enormous and determined, filling the space between the fleets like something being declared. He learned later that the song was called Thunderstruck. He was not sure what that meant, but listening to it in the dark of space, with 47 human warships forming their lines ahead and 30 draft ships closing in, he found that it made something move in his chest that he did not have a word for. The draft fleet paused. It was subtle, a slight reduction in approach speed, a small adjustment in formation. KL7 noticed it because he had studied draft fleet behavior patterns for the last 30 hours, but he thought that Malik noticed it too because the corner of her mouth moved slightly. The draft were not expecting 47 warships. They were expecting nothing, a pre-FTL civilization, perhaps a few crude missiles if they were unlucky, not 47 warships in organized formation, broadcasting music like a challenge. The pause lasted 4 seconds, then the draft resumed their approach and opened fire. What happened next was not what KL7 expected, and he had been trying to expect it. The draft fired in the standard opening pattern, concentrated fire at the center of the human formation, intended to break the line and create chaos. Human ships did not hold formation. They scattered, but not randomly. They scattered in specific directions, splitting into small groups of 4 and 5, pulling apart in angles that made no tactical sense by any database KL7 had ever studied, and because the angles made no sense, the draft targeting systems, calibrated against known ship archetypes and known tactical responses, could not predict where they were going. 3 draft shots missed entirely, 2 hit shields but at the wrong angles, deflecting rather than penetrating. 1 human ship took a direct hit on its port side and kept moving. Then the human ships fired back. Not all at once, in sequence from different angles targeting the same points on the draft forward ships, the joint between the forward armor plating and the drive housing, which KL7 had identified from the intelligence file as the weakest point in draft ship design. He had told the engineers this during the question session. They had listened and said thank you and gone away. He had not known at the time how carefully they had been listening. 2 of the 30 draft forward ships lost their drives immediately. They drifted, still intact but unable to maneuver. Iron wing formation fractured because the formation required all 30 ships to move together, and 2 of them suddenly could not move at all. The draft adapted. Of course they adapted. 800 years of conquest does not produce a fleet that cannot adapt. They broke their own formation, which was a thing Kale had never seen them do, and began moving independently, trying to surround the human ships. The human ships adapted faster. This was the thing. KL7 had tried to articulate to the council in his report and had not been able to find the right words for. The draft adapted, but they adapted in steps: assess, plan, and execute the way an experienced military force adapts. The humans adapted mid-motion. They sent tactical updates to each other in real time, in short clipped sentences, and changed what they were doing before the draft had finished. Assessing. One group of human ships reversed course and came in from behind a draft flanking vessel. Before the flank maneuver was complete, another group formed a tight cluster that the draft targeting system apparently classified as a single large target, fired at it as such and missed all 5 ships. KL-7 sat in his observer chair and did not observe quietly. He said several things in Voron that had no translation. He gripped the armrest. He watched the display with his whole body leaning forward. At one point, a draft destroyer broke through the human line and came directly toward the flagship. Malik did not flinch. She said 3 words into her headset, and 4 human ships that had been on the far left of the display arrived at the destroyer's position from 4 different angles simultaneously, which should not have been tactically possible given where they had been 30 seconds ago, and was only possible because whoever was coordinating them had started moving them before the destroyer broke through, had predicted it was going to happen before it happened. KL-7 looked at Malik. She was looking at the display with a steady, focused expression of someone solving a problem. He thought, she is not reacting, she is playing ahead. The battle lasted 1 hour and 14 minutes. At the end of it, 11 draft ships were disabled, 4 were destroyed. The remaining 15 were in full retreat, moving back toward the system edge at maximum speed. No human ship had been destroyed, though 6 had significant damage and 2 had to be towed back toward Earth. The music played until the last red marker vanished from the display. Then Malik said, "All ships stand down. Damage reports." And that was that. The Voron Grand Continuance Council arrived in the Sol system 8 days later in a diplomatic vessel large enough to make the statement they intended. Counselor Devin 1 led the delegation. She had seen KL-7's message, the short one he had sent to Ren 4 before leaving, which Ren 4 had quietly forwarded to her within the hour. She had also seen, by the time she arrived, the full recording of the battle, which had been broadcast on human communication channels and which had reached Voron monitoring stations. 3 days later, she had watched it twice. The council met with human representatives on neutral ground, a platform assembled in orbit halfway between the diplomatic vessel and Earth. There were formal greetings, formal introductions, formal presentations of credentials. The Voron were very good at formal things. Then Devin 1 laid out the offer. Protected status for Sol 3 under the aegis of the Voron Collective. Resources, technology sharing, official recognition, the standard package offered to younger species under Voron patronage. It was a generous offer. It was a very good deal. General Malik listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When it was finished, she thanked Counselor Devin 1 for the offer with genuine courtesy and declined it. Devin 1 blinked. It was KL-7. Thought probably the first time anyone had declined the offer. "We appreciate the protection," Malik said, "but we don't need a patron. We'd like to propose a different arrangement." She put a document on the table. It was short, 1 page. The language was plain and direct. It was a mutual defense pact between equals, equal obligations, equal access, equal standing, no patronage, no protected species classification, no senior and junior partner, 2 civilizations standing beside each other in a galaxy. that was larger and more dangerous than either had navigated alone. The council conferred quietly for several minutes. KL-7 was not part of the delegation. He was standing off to one side in the unofficial capacity of someone who was technically there without authorization, but Divin 1 caught his eye once during the conference. He said nothing. He had already said days ago everything he knew how to say about this species. Then Divin 1 turned back to the table and said, "We will need to review the specific terms." Malik nodded. "Of course, we've marked the points we consider essential. The rest is open to discussion." She paused. "We're easy to work with." The review took 3 days. The humans did not change the essential points. They were polite and clear and completely firm about what they would and would not accept. When the Vorin proposed language that shifted the balance slightly towards senior-junior status, the humans noted it, thanked them for the suggestion, and proposed different language that did not do that every time without raising their voices or appearing annoyed. Just firmly and clearly, the way you explain that a measurement is wrong, without blaming anyone for measuring wrong. The treaty was signed on the 4th day. There was a ceremony. The Vorin were very good at ceremonies. The humans seemed to enjoy them more than the Vorin did, which surprised KL-7, and then thinking about it did not surprise him at all. Afterward, standing outside the platform's observation deck with the blue curve of Earth visible through the wide transparent wall, KL-7 found Dale beside him. Dale had been present for the signing, as KL-7 was not entirely sure in what capacity. He seemed to have been invited because people wanted him there, which was a sufficient reason. "How's the ship?" Dale asked. The continuance, KL-7 thought about the proper Vorin repair that had removed all the improvised components, the output rating that had gone back to normal. "It is fine," he said. "Standard condition." Dale nodded. He looked at Earth below them for a while. "I should have left the relay in," KL-7 said. "Probably," Dale said. "Want me to take another look at it before you head home?" KL-7 looked at him. Dale was 73 years old. He had helped repair an alien ship with industrial cleaning fluid and a very good feeling. He had been present somehow for all of this, the repair, the warning, the treaty, not because he held any official position, but because he was the kind of person who showed up when something needed doing and stayed until it was done. "Yes," KL-7 said, "I would like that." Dale handed him a thermos. The coffee was hot and strong and tasted nothing like what the courier ship's dispenser made. KL-7 drank it and looked down at Earth and thought about a word in one of the human languages the Matrix had pulled up during the translation work. The word was stubborn. The Matrix offered several definitions. The one KL-7 kept returning to was refusing to give up, especially in the face of difficulty or resistance. He thought it was the most important word he had learned in any language. Below them, Earth turned slowly in the dark, the way it had been turning for billions of years, patient and blue and completely unaware probably that a species had grown on its surface that could not leave a broken thing alone, that looked at problems and did not ask if they were solvable, that showed up uninvited and knocked on the hall and offered coffee to strangers from the stars, that had been called irregular, that had been called a potential threat, that had looked at 30 warships with 800 years of experience and said, "We're going to surprise them." And had been right. Kale 7 finished the coffee, set the thermos down, and began thinking about what else on the continuance he should let Dale look at. There was, he decided, quite a lot.